Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Wisco Whiskey Review with me, Jeff. Today we're going to talk about Old Tub Bourbon. Now this is made by the Jim Beam Distilling Company out of Claremont, Kentucky, and that's the same Jim Beam that you see on the shelves that you probably know and have heard of, unless you're living under a rock. So this is an offering from them, and this was actually up until 2020 was a distillery only release. So you had to go to the distillery to get it. But starting last year, they realized it was popular and they started offering it outside of that. Now this is being released as a limited edition, as what they call it, but it's been around since 2020, and so far, you can still find it on the shelves everywhere. So we'll see how limited it actually is. Hopefully they keep it around for a long time. Because I'll get into the value later, but it's a fantastic value. Getting into the history real quick, I won't go into the whole Jim Beam history because it's pretty lengthy, but Old Tub is a throwback, the name to the distillery called Old Tub, which again is in the Jim Beam family. But in 1892, they renamed it to Old Tub Distillery to reflect their #1 selling bourbon at that time, which was called Old Tub. So I kind of find it cool that the name goes all that way back, to before 1900, and kind of harkens back to that era. This is a non-age stated bottled and bond Kentucky straight bourbon. So even though it's non-age stated, we know that it has to be at least 4 years old in order to be bottled and bond. So I would imagine it's, again, probably there's some older stuff in there, but at least 4 years old. This is also non-chill filtered, meaning they don't do any filtration to it at all, and that helps a lot of people think, at least it does, impart a lot of the flavors to stay in there instead of stripping out some of them during the filtration process. Now that's kind of debated, but that's the general idea. So the mash bill on this one is going to be 75% corn, 13% rye, and 12% malted barley. I don't know, I'll have to look it up to see if that's the exact same mash bill as a lot of the other Jim Beam products. I don't know how varied their mash bills usually are, but I feel like that's probably a pretty typical one for them. Being that they distill it there, it would make sense to keep the mash bills pretty close. Alright, so that's enough about the whiskey. This is going to be a full review, so again, I'll go through the nose, the palate, the finish, and the value. 0 out of 10, and then average it out after that and give you guys the total there. One thing I don't like about Jim Beam is just their caps. To me, the caps are kind of hard to get off sometimes. They just really seem to be wedged in there. There's not a lot of cap to actually pull on to get it out. It's just a little nitpicky thing, but I just wish they would get some, different cork toppers or just different tops for their bottles. All right, so let's dive into it here. Again, I don't grade the color, but we'll take a look at it. I'd say this is a pretty standard, straight bourbon whiskey color. It's not super dark, it's not super light. It's kind of in that middle of, kind of a nice golden amber. Again, this is non-chill filtered, so a lot of people believe that, kind of makes the whiskey a little bit oilier. It doesn't strip out some of those oils and congeners and everything. And it does seem to hug the glass pretty well, so let's do the nose. So this is coming off pretty sweet on the nose, and there's also some peanuts in there. And if you know anything about Jim Beam, that's one of the kind of standout nose and palate signatures that a lot of people pick out with Jim Beam products is peanuts. Now that can show up, as roasted peanuts, it could be salted or unsalted peanuts, it could be just peanut shells on a floor. There's a lot of, kind of different things depending on your palate and your nosing abilities and stuff like that. It's going to present differently to everyone. There's not a ton of oak going on there, but there's just a lot of your typical bourbon notes, your caramels, vanillas, a little bit of oak. Like I said, there's that peanut. I'm getting more of kind of like a salted peanut, like a really dense salted peanut. I don't know, it's pretty enjoyable though. That's your typical bourbon notes. All right, let's go in for the palate. Cheers, guys. All right, so with this being my first whiskey of the day, there is just a little bit of ethanol hit, but that's, to be expected. It's kind of common. I didn't mention this before, but I should now. Also, bottled and bond means it has to be exactly 100 proof or 50% ABV, and that's what this one is too. Yeah, so far this is kind of sticking out as just a really well-balanced bourbon with all of your typical bourbon notes, but then again it kind of leans a little bit heavier on that peanut side, which to me kind of shows up as like, you know, a little nutty and pretty sweet as well. There's really not a whole lot of like funk going on or anything like that. There's definitely that, you know, that bit of rice spice in there, the baking spices. Being that this isn't a like super aged bourbon or anything like that, it's not overly oaky. You know, you do get a little bit of that kind of charred wood or that white oak in there, but it's not overpowering. So far this is just really well balanced. You know, and the mouthfeel is great. Again, with it being non-chill filtered, I think that, to me at least, improves the quality of the mouthfeel. I don't think it takes away from that. You know, it's definitely not thin feeling. I would say as far as like fruit flavors go, there's just a little bit of cherry kind of poking up, but again, it's, you know, it's more of the vanillas, the caramels, and the peanuts that's kind of sticking out to me. But that's a very good palate. I mean, it's pretty darn good. All right, let's grade the nose. So again, we'll go back to it after sipping. Sometimes you can pick out some different things that you didn't before. All right, so the nose hasn't changed a ton, but it does present itself just a little bit sweeter than it was before, which is kind of interesting. All right, so the nose isn't anything that's gonna like completely blow you out of the water. It's, you know, your typical bourbon, but it does it in a good way. It's very solid. You know, it hasn't changed a lot since I first poured it. If you can tell, this is getting towards the bottom of the bottle, so, you know, this has had time to kind of air out a little bit and get some air in there. But I would say it's, you know, just above average for kind of run-of-the-mill noses. We'll give it a 6. All right, so now we're gonna judge the palate. Yeah, so the palate hasn't changed much either, which I think is a good thing, because again, this is drinking really well. If you've had Jim Beam products before, like your, you know, the standard white label or any of the other, you know, kind of their Jim Beam expressions, not so much like the Bookers or the Bakers or any of the other kind of higher end ones, but even if you've just had just Jim Beam, I think you'd like this one. Again, the profile is very similar. Again, you know, from what I've experienced in other Jim Beam products, it's kind of right there with those. But this drink's quite a bit better from what I remember, like the white label tasting like. You know, the proof is there, being non-chill filtered, I think helps bring out a lot more of those kind of peanut flavors and makes them more dense and, you know, just a little bit oilier and just better, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's not anything completely different in this one that you're not going to find in a ton of other bourbons, other than just kind of that peanut forward, you know, kind of side note going on. Because that is pretty prevalent, and you don't always see that in a lot of bourbons. So that's kind of what sticks out, you know, the most for this one. But again, that's in a lot of Jim Beam expressions. So if you like Jim Beam, I think you'd like this one. But this is a good solid palate. You know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. You know, the proof is there, the flavors are there. They're not going in any weird directions or anything. So I'm actually gonna give the palate a 7 on this one. All right, so now we're gonna talk about the finish, which are the flavors that last after you've drank it, kind of what lingers around and whether it's kind of a short, medium, or long finish. For me, and with like a lot of other bourbons, the spice is kind of the thing that's lingering, or that's kind of at the tail end of everything for me. And that does show up in a lot of bourbons, and that's kind of what I like about it. You know, you get the sweet vanilla, caramel, a lot of times cherry, or peanuts in this case up front, and then as that goes away you get more of the spice kind of on the back end. So those baking spices are coming through pretty prominently in here. I'm getting like some white pepper notes in there, the cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, all that kind of stuff. So I think I'm gonna have to give the finish, let's give it a 6.5. I think it's pretty good. All right, so last but not least, we're gonna talk about the value, and I think that's where this thing shines the best. Even though they said it's a limited edition or a limited release, you know, it's still around and the distribution is fantastic because it's Jim Beam. So, you know, the MSRP on this one's about 25 bucks. And honestly, you know, to me, it's right up there with like your Wild Turkey 101s, you know, your Evan Williams bottled in bond, stuff like that. It's up there. Again, if you like that Jim Beam kind of nutty profile, this is going to be right up your alley, and this is going to be kind of your Wild Turkey 101. You know, that's to me a good comparison, because It's right in that price range of, you know, the mid-20s. It's about the same proof. This one might be a little bit younger than, say, you know, 101 Wild Turkey, but you know, it has enough age where I don't think you're gonna think you're drinking a young bourbon, if that makes sense. It definitely has enough age on it and enough going on to where you know you're drinking something decent. So even though it's only 25 bucks, I think this is a fantastic value. I'm gonna have to put it up there at an 8. All right, so that brings us to our total, which is 6.875 out of 10. Now I think that's really respectable. Honestly, you know, I probably could have given this an extra bump in numbers, 1 or 2 here and there. I think this is just a really solid bourbon, especially for the money. And if you can find it, if you've never had it before, especially if you like Jim Beam too, that's the other thing. You know, some people might not like that kind of nutty profile going on, but if you do, I say you gotta try this. Again, for the price, you just can't beat it. So it is, you know, it is a limited edition, so I would say try it now before, you know, there's any talks of it going away. I haven't heard anything, but you know, you just never know with the state of bourbon these days. So thanks again for watching, guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe down below if you can. That helps me out a lot. I'm gonna try to be cranking out some more videos for you guys soon. I know I keep saying that, but I am trying to get more content out there for you. So thanks for watching. Grab some Old Tub and keep on sipping.